Hello my friends, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing a video that I have been asked to do a few times, and I did want to do this video, but I've been putting it off a little bit. Not because I didn't want to do the video, just because I didn't know what books I wanted to include in the video, and I wanted to kind of think about it a little bit. But this video is going to be a recommendations video. I have 10 books here that are horror books but also contain romance, because we all know that I love horror. I do. I really love horror. It's probably my favorite genre, but I also love romance. And so when you put romance into a horror book, it just makes me really happy. It's two things that I enjoy coming together, and I think that it's always a lot of fun. The 10 books I have here to talk about are all pretty different from each other. I would say that some are similar to each other, but they're very different in their own aspects, and I would say the level of romance or the type of romance in each book is very different. I was trying to have a kind of a wide variety for people that don't necessarily like, you know, overwhelming romance in a book, or they want a little bit more of like a steamier romance in a book. You know, I tried to make it so I was hitting all my bases in this recommendations video. So I hope that that comes across and it works out in the end, and I hope that these aren't too repetitive for you. I know a lot of these books I have talked about in other videos, but these are some of my favorites for horror with romance, so that's why I included them in this video. If you do want a part 2, I can do that in the future, so you can let me know in the comments down below after you watch this video. But with that being said, I think I rambled on enough in this intro, so let's get into the recommendations. The first 3 books that I'm going to talk about first are Darcy's. I don't think anyone's going to be surprised. I talk about Darcy a ton on my channel. She's my favorite author, and she does horror with romance, and I think it would be a crime not to include some of her books. So I am including 3 that I personally find to be some of my favorites with romance in them, and I think they're all very different from each other, and yeah, I just wanted to recommend these 3 for you. The first one is the first book in a series, and that is Voices in the Snow. This is the Black Winter series, and this is probably one of my favorite books ever by Darcy. I really enjoy this series as a whole, but this first book was just really good, and it made me want to read every book that Darcy had ever written. This book is about Claire, who's driving in a storm and she gets into an accident, and when she wakes up she's in this strange mansion that she's never been in before with this strange guy who she doesn't know, and she's kind of freaked out. He claims that he saw her and he brought her into his home to make sure that she was okay and just, you know, get her help if she needed it. And she's very wary, but they end up finding out that there is something going on outside. There are things lurking in the shadows. There is something really wrong, and they have to like team up and just, you know, stay alive. I would say this series is one of the heavier romance horrors on this list, because it is a really big main like factor in this story, Claire and Doran's relationship and what they're going through. But this is also like a zombie apocalypse type of story as well, and I'm not really big on zombie apocalypse type of stories. It's not really my thing in horror. It's not really something I gravitate towards, but I really love Darcy's take on it, and of course the romance is an added bonus, and I really enjoyed the whole series. The whole series was great, but this first book is probably one of my favorites out of the 4, just because it was a really good start and a really good beginning, and I just really got attached to the characters really fast. So I highly recommend checking out Voices in the Snow, but just the Black Winter series in general. Next up is another series from Darcy. This one's actually currently ongoing, so the 3rd book is not out yet, but I want to recommend The Whispering Dead. This is the first book in the Gravekeeper series, and this is a very interesting storyline so far. I would say the romance is very subdued in this one. I personally could do with a little bit more of the romance in this series between the characters, because I just really like these characters. But I do have hopes that in the third book it's gonna get a little bit more. Hopefully. I'm hoping. I really want some more romance from this series because I am enjoying it a lot. This story is about Kira, who is being hunted, but Kira also has no memory of who she is, where she comes from, her life. She has no memories. And she's being chased by, she doesn't know, but she's being chased, and she ends up taking shelter at this groundskeeper's cottage in this graveyard. And she ends up realizing that she can see the dead. She can see these ghosts. They're talking to her. She can hear them. The series is following her helping ghosts, but also trying to piece her own backstory and what's going on and who's chasing her together. I really love the characters in this series. The characters are some of my absolute favorite. They are so lovable, and I just really enjoy them so much, and each book is getting better and better. This one was like a 4-star for me, but The Ravenous Dead, which is the next book in the series, was a 5-star. I loved that so much. That one was my favorite so far. And the third book isn't coming out until next year, but we're almost there. We're almost there. I think it'll be better for people who don't want like an overwhelming romance, because it is there, but it's very muted and understated. Not really like Voices in the Snow or the Black Winter series, where that is such a main focus. This one is more of like a little bit here and there, a little bit to the side, but I still really enjoy this series, and I think it's worth checking out. Okay, and last for Darcy is House of Shadows. So this is book 1 of 2. There is a second. It's like a duo, and the second one is called House of Secrets. But I actually really loved the first book the most. I thought it was the best. I did like the second book a lot. It just wasn't as good as the first one for me. This story is about Sophie, whose family ends up becoming bankrupt, and they're not doing well. And as a solution, she ends up getting a marriage proposal from this really wealthy man who is also a stranger. She doesn't really know him, but she accepts to save her family, and he takes her to his home. At his home are also some of his relatives who are a little bit cold, a little bit distant, a little bit weird, and Sophie realizes that there's something going on inside this house. There's something not quite right. There's something off. I really like this one. I will say that the romance is a little bit insta-love, because they don't really know each other, and then it's just like boom, they like each other really fast and really quick. But if you don't really mind that, I think that you would probably really enjoy this. It's not that annoying. I don't hate insta-love. It's not one of my favorite tropes, but it wasn't too annoying or too overbearing in this one, but you can tell that it is very insta-love. But the overall plot of the story, like the house and the relatives and, you know, what's going on, is a very interesting and very cool, and I did like that a lot. And then the romance was just an added bonus for me. I really enjoyed that as well. I would say this one's a little bit more like Voices in the Snow, where the romance is more of like a main driving factor. There's the plot, but then the romance is pretty in your face. So if you don't like that, maybe don't pick this one up. But I did enjoy the romance a lot, and I thought the story was actually really good, and I think the duo House of Shadows and House of Secrets are both very good. Next up we have Mina and the Undead by Amy McCaw. I just recently read Mina and the Slayers, which is the sequel to Mina and the Undead, so I do recommend both. They both do have romance in them, but I'm going to show you the first book for obvious reasons. But this is a YA vampire horror romance book. It takes place in the 90s, and it has a lot of horror movie references, and it's just a lot of fun. It feels very 90s, and it's just a really easy and fun and like lighthearted read. It's not too difficult to get sucked into. If you're not someone who really enjoys horror a lot and you don't like to be scared too much, I feel like this is a good option, because it's more of like a fun, light-hearted horror novel, and it's not too much for people who aren't used to a lot of horror. This is about the main character Mina, who comes to visit her sister in New Orleans for the summer. Her and her sister kind of have a rocky relationship, so she's coming to spend time with her, and she's just trying to get to know her sister better now that they are older and try to have a different kind of relationship with her. While there, Mina gets a job at this horror movie mansion. She ends up meeting Jared, who is her sister's roommate, and they end up hitting it off, and that is where the romance is. But while Mina is working there, she ends up stumbling upon a girl who is dead, and this girl has 2 puncture marks on her neck. Mina's sister is actually a suspect in this murder, and Mina has to try and help prove her sister's innocence. This is a lot of fun. Like I said, it's very nostalgic, very 90s. If you like vampire stories, like if you're very familiar with vampire folklore and vampire stories and just like vampires in horror movies and, you know, horror books, I think you'll really enjoy this. If you like horror movies and you like references and nods to that in your books, I feel like you would like this as well. It's just a lot of fun, and it's really an easy read, and it's just a good time. The next book is actually another YA horror, and that is My Dearest Darkest by Kayla Cottingham. This is a YA horror, but it's like dark academia, and it's also sapphic. This book is about this private academy, and these girls attending this academy accidentally summon this creature that lives underneath the school. And when they do, this creature promises them everything they want, everything they desire, everything they wish. But there is a price. Of course, the price is not an innocent little thing. It becomes more and more horrific as it goes on, and the 2 main characters, Finch and Selena, have to work together to put a stop to the creature. This is so good. I was genuinely surprised by how creepy this book is. There are some really creepy and intense scenes, and for it being a YA, that's like really good in my opinion, because YA doesn't always tend to push boundaries a lot of the time. It doesn't tend to, you know, really go there like adult horror does, but I really feel like this one is a really great representation of what YA horror can be and how good it really can get. The romance is really sweet and cute, and I love both characters so much. They're just really like adorable together, and I was just really rooting for them the whole time. I really enjoyed them individually and together, like working together. I just really liked them. And yeah, I just thought this was like such an enjoyable experience. The writing was really beautiful. I think this would be perfect to read during fall because it just has that atmosphere, like that dark academia feel, of course, but the private academy with just like the grounds and like the architecture, and it's really beautiful. The writing's great, and of course the story is really good too, and I also love the romance. So I just think this one's a really great one, and I highly recommend it. Next up is Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a Dracula reimagining from Dracula's bride's perspective, and it is also sapphic. So this one is absolutely gorgeous. The writing is stunning. It's very like lyrical and dreamy and soft, and just like, it's just very beautiful how well written it is. It just has a very nice writing style. I know that sounds very weird, but the writing is just very soft and luxurious, and it's very gorgeous writing. I will say that this one's probably the most sexual in nature with the romance, so if that's not something that you enjoy, I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend this one. I don't personally think it was too much, but I also am someone who enjoys reading smut in horror or not in horror, so that's just my opinion. But I do recommend this if you love, you know, Dracula or vampire stories, but you want a more like sapphic take on it. I think that this would just be a really great option. It's also very short. I read it in just a few hours. It was very quick and easy, and again, the writing is just beautiful, and the story was just really good. I was really surprised. I didn't expect too much from it because I'm not someone who typically enjoys too many vampire stories. And I've also never read Dracula, so I was worried that I wasn't going to like really understand, or I wasn't going to be able to grasp this story, but I really enjoyed it, and I think a lot of people would also really enjoy this one. The next book I'm going to recommend is one that I actually just recently read, but I really enjoyed it, so I feel like I have to include it, and that is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. This is a witchy horror fantasy with a little bit of romance in it, and this was incredibly good. I did not expect to like it this much, but it was so enjoyable. This is also a YA, which I actually didn't realize when reading it. I should have when I was reading it, but I didn't really, I don't know, I just wasn't thinking about it. So from my perspective, it doesn't read too overly YA, which I appreciate, because sometimes YA has a certain type of writing feel to it, and it can be a little much sometimes. So I did appreciate that this was not so much that. I feel like if you like the movie The Witch, you would also really enjoy this, because it has a similar vibe to it. This is about the main character, Emmanuel, whose family is kind of considered outsiders. They're looked down upon because her mother had a relationship with someone of a different race, and because of that relationship, that put the whole family really just on the outside of this society. But Emmanuel does her best to just kind of keep her head down, keep to the rules, keep to the guidelines, and just not make any big waves. However, one day Emmanuel wanders into this forest, which she is not supposed to be in, and the spirits of these witches give her this diary, and the diary belonged to her mother. She starts reading things about the society, about witches, about witchcraft, and she starts realizing that the things that she thought might not actually be the truth. So I actually didn't know that this book had romance in it. I was very surprised. It's not an overpowering romance, but I would say the second half is more heavily focused on a romance. There is more of a romance aspect to the second half, but I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed the characters of this. I loved the witchy vibes. I loved the whole explanation for everything. I like how everything turned out in the end. But I think if you like witchy books and you like kind of books that have a cult feel, like this does have a very cult-like feel to it as well. Like the society that Emmanuel is living in has that cult vibe. Plus the witchcraft and the witchiness is just really good, and then you add romance, and I think that makes for a really great story. So I definitely recommend this one. The next book is another YA, and that is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This is a YA horror, but it's also sapphic as well, just like My Dearest Darkest, which I really enjoy. This one is very interesting because the first half of the book I really enjoyed, and then the second half of the book wasn't really my favorite. Just because I didn't necessarily love the second half of this book doesn't mean that other people won't enjoy this book, so I did want to include this. This book is about the Raxter School for Girls, which is under quarantine. It's been under quarantine for 18 months because there is this thing called the tox. So basically the tox infected the teachers first, and then now it's picking off the students, and they are not allowed to really wander past a certain part of the perimeter. But the story is about Hetty and Byatt. They are friends, and one day Byatt goes missing, and Hetty decides that she is going to try and find her. So this is more of like a body horror type of horror. Like the descriptions of the way the tox infects the girls is very interesting, and I actually thought it was very well done and very cool and really descriptive, and just very interesting to read. So I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the romance of this one. I feel like it changes a little bit from the second half of the book. Like I said, the second half is pretty different from the first half, so it just like depends on, I think, how you enjoy this book, like this kind of plot, this type of horror. If this sounds like something you would enjoy, you'll probably really enjoy this story. Ever since you know, the panini, I haven't been super interested in like infections and parasites and that kind of thing in horror. That's not really my thing. I've never really enjoyed it, but ever since, you know, the panini, I really didn't enjoy it. So for me to enjoy it as much as I did, I think that speaks volumes for the book itself, because I did actually really like this book in the beginning. I just think the second half takes a very odd turn that I didn't particularly like, but I think that if you like body horror and you like YA and you like sapphic stories, I think you might enjoy this one, so that is why I am recommending it. The next book I'm going to recommend is The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas. I gave this 3 stars, but I'm including this because I think the romance in this book is worth it, in my opinion. The romance is what kept me invested in this story and kept me reading, so that is why I'm including it, because I do think that a lot of people will really like this book, not just for the romance but just for what it is in general, because this is a Gothic horror novel and I think a lot of people do really enjoy Gothic horror. It's not always a hit for me, but I think that this one mixed with the romance could be something that a lot of people enjoy. So this is about the main character who gets married to this man, and she basically does it because a lot of things have been happening in her life and she feels like this is probably the best solution to fixing things. So she gets married to this man, and there are rumors about his first wife's death, and she doesn't really listen to them, but when he moves her to his home, she realizes that there is some weird things happening. It's a Gothic horror. I'm not going to tell you too much, but I think you can understand where I'm going with this. So this romance is more of a forbidden romance, which I really enjoyed. This is something that I personally really liked. I loved the romance of this. I think a lot of people might hate it because it's an interesting trope that I don't know if everyone loves, but I personally think this trope is a lot of fun, and with the plot being what it is, I think that this romance worked really, really well, and I think the forbiddenness of it worked in its favor and made it more enjoyable. I think this is definitely more of a romance forward horror, so I think if you don't enjoy romance too much, one, I feel like this video is probably not for you at all, and you're probably just wondering why you're watching it, but also you probably wouldn't enjoy this because the romance it's not super duper in your face, but it's there pretty frequently. So yeah, and it does get a little bit, you know, it gets a little bit steamy, so I do think a lot of people might enjoy this one. The last book that I'm going to recommend is one of my all-time favorites, and that is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I love this, which is funny because this is also a Gothic horror novel, and I definitely prefer Mexican Gothic, but I do think both are worth checking out. This one's just more of my favorite. This book is about the main character Noemi, who receives this letter from her cousin who is just newly married, and the letter is very worrisome. It's very like frantic, and it's not making too much sense. So Noemi decides to go see her cousin and see what's going on and see if there's something she can do to help, like make sure her cousin's okay. When she gets there, the cousin's new husband's family is very interesting. You can tell they're hiding something. You can tell they're a little, there's something there, right? They're all very odd. They all are hiding secrets. They're all very like cold, and they're just not very nice to Noemi. And Noemi wants answers. Noemi wants to know what's going on with her cousin. Why is her cousin writing this letter? Like, what is happening? But Noemi realizes that there is something sinister happening, and the only ally that she has in this house is the youngest son of this family, and he tries to help her even though his family is, you know, not so keen on that idea. The romance in this, for me, is very subdued. I feel like a lot of people could even argue that there's not really that much romance in here. I personally do find it to have romance. It's just a very, very mild, like, minor bit of romance. It's not as overwhelming or as overpowering as a lot of these in the stack that I showed you, but I do want to include this because there is there is a little bit of romance in here, and I personally really enjoyed it. I really liked the romance. I think it works really well with the Gothic story in general, just like with the Hacienda. I think Gothic and romance just go really well together, so for me this worked out really well, and I just love this story in general. I think it's an amazing Gothic horror story. I think Noemi is a fantastic main character. I absolutely adore her. I think she is just wonderful, and the whole story is just so good, so creepy, so unsettling, and I really love the ending and how everything turned out, even though it's a little bit of an interesting ending. I feel like you could argue how it really ends, but yeah, I really enjoy this one, and I think a lot of people would too. Alright my friends, those are 10 horror books that also contain romance that I highly recommend. I hope you enjoyed. I know that a few have asked me to do this, so I hope the ones that don't like romance and horror aren't super mad at me for doing this video, but if you would like a part 2, let me know in the comments. I would be happy to make one in the future as I read more horror books with romance and get more suggestions for you all. So let me know if you enjoyed this video and you want more. Give me a like, let me know in the comments down below. Feel free to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. We can become friends. We can talk about books, horrifying books, thrilling books, romance books, manga, all that fun stuff. And with that being said, I hope you are having a great day, night, morning, afternoon, wherever you are, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!